I was born in 1931. So this would have been about 1933, 34. And Dad, went out of town to get work. And we lived with Grandma. And it was a wonderful experience because the west side of St. Paul was a Jewish community. A lot of the early settlers of the Jewish people lived there. And our family was a very caring family. And in that particular area, the families looked after one another. And it wasn't just a Jewish community that I recall, but there also was a Mexican American community. In fact, next door there were I believe the Gonzalez, and I remember Shata. Anyway, it was a very good community, a nice place for a little girl to begin, growing up. Oh, one of the experiences when we lived on the west side and even afterwards was the neighborhood house, which is still there today, but not on the west side because that has been turned into a industrial development. But when I was a little girl, I went there and I learned how to do the cross stitch. And also there were a number of other children in the neighborhood, and we went there for recreation. And our parents, the ones who came, my mother was born in the United States. My father was born in Russia. But I was going to say, the families that moved there that did not speak English and were not citizens would come to the neighborhood house to learn English and to learn other skills of being in America from the countries that they came from. And the neighborhood house still continues to service the people who come, who don't speak English or who need help with their English, plus other things that community centers help people with. I had worked each summer so that I could earn money to pay for my tuition, which I remember at that time, 1948, 49 till 53 when I graduated, was probably $50 a quarter, which when I tell my kids or grandkids, they say, how was that possible? Well, it was in the school, the University of Minnesota. So what did I look for? The Prudential Company was hiring. They came to University of Minnesota, as did many. And I also looked at the Procter and Gamble. And those were things in the business world that I really seemed to glam onto more than feeling I would want to spend 8 hours a day with the little children, or that I could really be a good person to be with those little children. I felt more comfortable, and I felt I could do better with adults, let's say, and also in a business environment. So Council of Jewish Women was a wonderful opportunity for me to be in the community. And of course, being in the community, I got to meet a lot of great people. And as I mentioned, I really have a curiosity about what makes people tick. And that's pretty much the way I've been all of I'd say my married life, but I suppose my foundation came from way back when I was on the west side and knew about the neighbors and felt comfortable visiting with people who were different, because there were a lot of, they weren't just all Jewish people, though even the Jewish people were different. They were all different kinds, the ones who spoke Yiddish, the ones that had different problems, and the kids, my friends that I met, and it was all good. And then I became very involved in a new project about 35 years ago in the Jewish Historical Society. I'd never been interested in like genealogy, but I had a friend, Marilyn Chiat, and Marilyn had done a doctorate dissertation and looking at the Jewish people who were in small towns in Minnesota. And what she did is, and she also was in women's studies, Marilyn was, and she thought it was important to get those stories of the women in these small communities who happened to be Jewish, but how did they manage to raise their families and still keep a Jewish home, for one thing, and also what was their life like. And so we worked together, and she got up and she knew that I was active in the Jewish community. And she was pretty active, but she didn't know enough people. And we were able to get more people involved. And for some reason, I seem to have that personality that reaches out to people. If I know you, even if I only know you a little bit, and I think you might have an interest, I will contact that person and say, would you like to work on this? Hey, do you have any ideas that might help us? This is something that we think is important. Then we reached out, a group of us, about 5 of us, to the community itself, to our federations, to our Jewish community centers, to our people that we knew that had a deep commitment to doing genealogies and finding the history of their families. And we got a group together, and that formed, we originally were called the Minnesota Jewish Historical Society, because the bulk of our material was from Minnesota. And and we were able to do a partnership, the Jewish Historical Society, with the Minnesota Historical Society. We had, I think, originally a small grant to get materials together. But the end result was Unpacking on the Prairie, it was called. And it was a wonderful exhibit. And we were fortunate because they were so great to work with. Nina Archibald, whom we worked with, and I got to know personally, who was the director of and we got volunteers from everywhere, from the Jewish community and the general community, and we learned a lot about the history of Jewish women in the upper Midwest. Well, my father was very open. He didn't speak the King's English, but he did speak English, and he did understand people. And he always reached out to people, and he was a very hard worker, very hard. I mean, when you have a third grade education, and but he worked physically hard, but emotionally he was very giving. He was that kind of person, and he was giving to not only to family but he gave it in a quiet way. And Mother was just a very beautiful woman, very, I'd say, cultured in a way, though she only went to 8th grade herself. However, when she was about 15, she went to business school, and she learned typing and shorthand, and she worked for the state capitol. That would have been about 1925 or 24 or something. So she was always very good with numbers and booking, and just very well organized and everything that she did. We had a grocery store for many years on Randolph, 2121 Randolph, which is near St. Catherine's Block. Mother would always do the books and everything like that. But Dad was very good. In fact, he had not been a butcher, but when we had the grocery store, he said it was important to have meat, So he went to butcher school, and he learned how to make chops and do hamburger and whatnot. And he was good at figuring out what to do, and he knew his numbers, he did know his numbers good. And then another business my dad was in years later, because his brother got in that business, was the rendering business. And Mother did all the books. For me, life's purpose is to reach out to others, and to do the best I can with what I have, and like in my home, I'm very fortunate that I have, been able, economically, to be able to do a number of things. But had I not been, had I had less, let's say, I still would be able to work with whatever I had. If I lived in a smaller house, I think it's important for a person to have a feeling that what they have is important, whatever it is, whether it's their children, it's their health, it's their their parents, it's whatever, their neighbors, whatever they have. If they have a small house or they have no house, maybe they live in an apartment as a whole too, of course. But whatever a person has, to look at what it means to them, and to have an attitude that what they have is good, and to share whatever it is. If you have a lot, I'm fortunate that I have a lot, so I'm able to share more, say, than somebody else. Big deal. But it's important proportionately that we all share whatever we have with others. But when it comes to seeing people on the street, you don't run away from people. You accept them as they are, unless they mean harm. If they're coming at you with their car, or something like that, or they're rude or something like that. But I basically try to learn from the people that I meet, and become acquainted with. She has not only reached out to the Jewish community, to the different areas, different ways of being Jewish, like you say, conservative, Orthodox, Reformed. She's very ecumenical in that way. But more important, she's very ecumenical. Reaches out to all people. And to her, there are no others. Others, I think, to Rabbi Zimmerman, then is everybody. She has a wonderful way of pulling in people and giving out the Jewish, I shouldn't say story, but what being Jewish is about, and how being Jewish really relates to all people. And I guess that's kind of my philosophy or way of looking at Judaism. Judaism is another way to express how one believes in God, or with, even if those that don't believe in God, one that believes in a being larger than the self. And but mostly I say God. And when I thank God, I really thank God. And I don't think that God is Jewish or Catholic or Hindu or Muslim or Sikh, or I don't know, whatever the different religions are, Episcopal, what have you. They're all part of humanity. And feel very fortunate that I am Jewish. There's something, curse, it's a part of me since I was a little girl. And what you have as a growing up, if it's a good experience. I know there's some people who grow up in Judaism, Catholicism, whatever the religion might happen to be, and don't have good experiences. Because I think that's what life is. Life is your perspective. And nowadays, as they said in the trial of Chauvin's trial, the jury, and in a sense, all thinks of life in terms of what their experience is and how they relate to it. And I think it was really so good that all of the jury was together on their decision, realizing that humanity, the way you treat one another, is more important in reaching decisions than anything. And when you see something is wrong, you speak up. And I think this is true. And I too have to learn to speak up more. I am better at speaking out to bring people in, but when it comes to calling somebody on something that they've said, or I think they've said, I should get to be better at that. Because unless we talk to one another about the way we view each other, things aren't going to change. And that's kind of where I'd like to end it.